So I want to welcome you back to this second session where we're looking at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2. In the last chapter, we talked about the fact that you're called, that God calls us to a new responsibility in Christ. But as we look at Christian community, Paul then says in verse 2, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love. He says that we're called to bear with one another, or we're called to be able to handle the difficult moments with one another without losing a Christian disposition or a Christian demeanor. And he says that we are to do this with love. So the question is, how do I love in difficult spaces? What does it take for me to be a person who loves others when they're not being the easiest to work with? Paul says there are three characteristics we are to house. The first is lowliness or humility. The second is gentleness, and the third is long suffering, or what we would call patience. The first one, humility, speaks to this lowliness of heart. It's most likely used in this context to speak of a slave, because the word was so reserved for slave communities that they hardly used it in regular life. And so it speaks to the fact that a person is in direct recognition of their commitment to the one who's greater than them. And so humility is bigger than just being small. It's not that. It's actually choosing to not be arrogant. It's choosing to not act like you have it all together. Humility is being able to recognize and respect authority, to recognize and respect true power and the source of one's opportunity. The fact is, a slave would only be in the room if their master willed them to be in the room. And it's to remind us that we are where we are because we're invited by the Lord to be there. So humility is the first thing, and that humility keeps your mind humble. It keeps you from being able to get the big hit because you realize that you are where you are and who you are only by the grace of God. The second thing is gentleness. This word for gentleness, or in some translations, it'll be meekness. It's this disposition where you are able to consider the fragility of others. You're able to see others without a judgmental lens because you're able to understand that people are people. People are humans. We make mistakes. We have flaws. And so we don't hold people to this high and perfect standard that we ourselves cannot even attain, but we recognize their imperfections. And in doing so, we make room for them to be imperfect. The last thing he talks about is patience. This Greek word for patience literally translated means to have a long fuse. It means that you give people plenty of room before you erupt on them. It means, like one of those old Acme cartoons, that there's this huge long fuse that takes a long time before it gets to an explosive space. And my brother, my sister, Paul says we have to be in a space where we give people plenty of space to make mistakes. We give them plenty of room to be able to not act the way we want them to act, but to act how they are before we just explode on them. And so my brother and my sister, I encourage you to think about what Paul is saying. He's saying if we're going to be able to deal with one another, we've got to be able to understand that we are where we are because of the grace of God. We have to be able to understand and embrace people's imperfections, and then we have to give them a long fuse, give plenty of room for them to get it right and to learn and to grow. And as we do that, we'll discover that the things we had minimal patience for, the things we had minimal tolerance for, now we're able to deal with, we're able to make room for, because we recognize that they are who they are. And our brothers and sisters don't have to be perfect. They come with flaws, but it doesn't mean that they don't have a good heart. Doesn't mean they don't have a Christian disposition. It doesn't mean that they don't have a Christian pursuit. And the way we're able to love others is when we have a heart that loves God and makes room for others like ourselves to have mistakes and have flaws as we grow in Christ. God bless you.